He stood there in that conference room with his chest puffed out, completely relaxed, like a man who had already won. He had no idea the room was full of people who knew exactly what he'd done. That's the thing about a man who's used to getting away with it. He stops watching his back. And that's exactly when you move. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I walked into Pinnacle Systems that Tuesday morning in a rideshare, a blue Honda Civic with one of those pine tree air fresheners hanging from the mirror. The driver had NPR on low. I sat in the back with my folder on my lap and my old iPad in my bag, and I don't know how to describe it. Not nervous exactly. More like when a storm's been building all week and you can finally smell the rain coming. You know it's going to get loud. You're just waiting for the first crack of thunder. The lobby smelled like it always does, that mix of cool air conditioning and whatever cleaning product the crew uses on the marble floors. Citrus, something fake and citrus. I checked in at the front desk. Shelley, who I've known for 3 years, looked at me funny. Not rude, just curious. I smiled at her like it was any other morning, because I needed it to look like any other morning. The elevator ride to the 4th floor took about 30 seconds. I counted. 30 seconds of watching those little floor numbers light up and thinking, okay, Audra, you've been through harder things than this. You've done harder things than this. I stepped out and nearly walked straight into Orson. He was coming out of the kitchen alcove with a cup of coffee. The good stuff from the machine in the executive break room, not the cheap drip blend everyone else gets. He was wearing his gray blazer, the one I'd picked out with him at Nordstrom 2 Christmases ago. He looked up and his eyes went flat. Not angry, just flat, like a door closing. "You're early," he said. "Meeting's at 9, I said. "It's 8:53. He looked at my bag, specifically at the folder tucked under my arm. Something flickered across his face, just for a second, and then it was gone. He smiled instead. That easy practice smile he used in HR mediation sessions, the one that said, "I'm the reasonable one here." "Should be a quick conversation," he said. "I'll explain everything to Evelyn. It's just a misunderstanding about the paperwork." "Sure," I said. I walked past him toward the conference room. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't cold to him because I hated him. I was cold to him because I finally understood what I was dealing with. Not a bad man, exactly. A very specific kind of man. The kind who genuinely believes that if he can just frame the story right, reality will rearrange itself to match. He'd been doing it our entire marriage. He was planning to do it in that conference room. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that I'd stopped letting him write the story 3 weeks ago. I pushed open the conference room door. Evelyn Marsh was already there. She had her reading glasses on and a legal pad in front of her and a cup of tea she hadn't touched yet. Evelyn is one of those women who radiates competence the way some people radiate perfume. You feel it before you can name it. She looked up when I walked in. "Good morning, Audra." She glanced at the door behind me. "You came alone?" "Orson's right behind me," I said. I set my folder on the table. I set the iPad next to it. I sat down. Orson came in about a minute later. He pulled out the chair across from me, set his coffee down, crossed one leg over the other, and leaned back. Comfortable. Settled. A man in his element. Evelyn looked at both of us for a moment. Then she said, "Audra, I noticed you came in by rideshare this morning." Orson's mouth opened, and before I could say a single word, before I could form one sentence, he said, "Yeah, Celia's been using the truck. My sister needed it, so Audra let her borrow it for a bit." He said it the way you'd say the sky is blue, factual, bored, like it was obvious and slightly tedious that anyone needed to ask. The room went quiet. Evelyn's face did something I've thought about many times since. It didn't get angry. It just went very, very still, like a pond right before a stone drops in. "She's using it," Evelyn repeated. "Just temporarily," Orson said. He picked up his coffee. Audra was happy to help out. Evelyn looked at me, and I looked back at her, and I opened my folder and I said, "Evelyn, I have some things I'd like to show you." Let me back up. 3 weeks before that conference room on a Sunday morning, I was standing at my kitchen window watching the sun come up over South Mountain. I had instant coffee in my hand. The little brown crystals stirred into hot water from the microwave. Orson had an espresso machine on the counter that cost more than my first car. A real one, with the tamping and the steaming wand and the little metal basket you have to clean a specific way. He'd bought it because his buddy Marco had one. Restaurant quality, professional grade. The third time I'd tried to use it, he'd come over and gently, patiently taken it out of my hands because I was doing it wrong. So I made instant. He called it garbage. I drank it anyway because at least it was mine. The driveway was empty. My company truck, a 3-year-old white Ford F-150 with the Pinnacle Systems logo on the door, assigned to me as part of my promotion to senior infrastructure engineer, had been missing from that driveway for 11 days at that point. My reserved parking spot at the office had been empty even longer. I was used to looking at that empty driveway. But that morning, it was hitting different. Orson padded into the kitchen in his socks. He does that. He doesn't announce himself. He just appears. He poured himself a glass of water from the filtered pitcher, leaned against the counter, picked up his phone. "Celia's hearing back from that recruiter today," he said to his phone. "Good," I said. Silence. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the click of him scrolling. "She's using the truck for the commute still," he said. "Her car's been at the shop since Thursday. Some issue with the catalytic converter. They're saying it might be another week." I turned around from the window. "Orson," I said. That truck is company property. My name is on the registration. If Celia gets in an accident, if she gets a speeding ticket, it comes back to me, to Pinnacle. I've mentioned this." He looked up from his phone. Not all the way. Halfway. That particular look he had, like I'd said something mildly disappointing. "It's her commute," he said. "She's not joyriding, she's going to interviews." "I understand that, but I need it back. I've been taking the bus." "You said it was fine." "I said it was fine for 2 days. That was 2 weeks ago." He set his phone down on the counter, pressed his palms flat on the granite. This was his thinking about how to respond posture. "Audra," he said slowly, "my sister is trying to get her life together. She's had a rough 6 months. You know that." "I do know that. And you know what my parents did for us." There it was. I'd been waiting for it. $40,000. The down payment on our house, loaned to us 3 years ago by his parents when we couldn't qualify on my income alone. Orson kept that number in his back pocket like a key. He pulled it out whenever I tried to close a door. "That has nothing to do with the truck," I said, and I heard how thin my voice sounded. "It has everything to do with who we are as a family," he said. "My family stepped up for us, and now you won't let Celia use a truck for an extra week. It's not my truck to lend. You act like it's your personal vehicle." "I act like I'm responsible for it, because I am." He picked his phone back up. "She'll return it when her car is ready," he said. "Let it go." And I did. I let it go. I turned back to the window and I drank my instant coffee and I watched the empty driveway and I let it go, and the sick feeling that had been living in my chest for months settled in a little deeper. I want to talk about how it happens because people always ask. They say, "How did you not see it? How did you let it go on?" And the honest answer is that it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, reasonable-sounding increments. There was the credit card. About 2 years into our marriage, a bill arrived at the house for a Visa card I didn't know I had. $1,200 in charges. A hotel stay in Sedona, a set of golf clubs, 2 dinners at a steakhouse I'd never been to. I held that bill for a long time before I asked him about it. He'd looked genuinely puzzled. "I thought you'd want the rewards points," he said. "It's in your name because your credit score's better. I'm paying the balance." He said it the way you'd explain something obvious to a child. I put the bill down. I didn't close the account. I told myself it was a joint household decision and I just hadn't been consulted, which was a small thing, a manageable thing. By the time I found the second card, different bank, $4,000, including a weekend trip to Vegas I hadn't been invited on, I had already practiced not noticing so many times that I almost didn't. There were the charity board meetings. Orson volunteered me for his mother's church outreach committee without asking. She needs help with the social media, he said. You're good with computers. Never mind that I was a senior infrastructure engineer managing cloud architecture for a mid-sized tech company. Never mind that I had literally no time. 15 months I spent at those Tuesday evening meetings, running their Facebook page and setting up their donation portal, while Orson watched football at home. There were the dinner parties. Every few months, Orson would invite people over. His work friends, his college friends, his cousins. And he'd tell stories about my job in a way that made me sound like I typed things into a computer all day. I'd start to explain what I actually did, and he'd put his hand on my arm and say, "What she means is," and then simplify it down to something the table could nod along to. Later, he'd tell me he was just trying to help me connect with people. "You go too technical," he'd say. "You lose them." There were the weekends I lost, major project deadlines that I'd planned months around, and Orson would schedule a family thing. His niece's birthday, his parents' anniversary, his brother's lake house weekend. And when I said I had a work deadline, he'd look wounded. "My parents are starting to wonder about you. You always have an excuse." Each one of those things, on its own, was survivable, explainable, easy to wave away as a misunderstanding or a rough patch or just the normal friction of two people building a life together. But they weren't separate things. They were one thing, repeated over and over, a slow, patient process of making me smaller, taking up more and more of the space I used to occupy until I was pressed into a corner so small I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. The truck was just the thing I could see from the outside, the empty driveway, the empty parking spot, something concrete enough to point to, but it was never really about the truck. By the end of week 2, I'd stopped taking the bus and started carpooling with my coworker Darnell, who lived 12 minutes from me and was easygoing enough not to ask too many questions. I told him my truck was in for service. He said, "Man, dealerships take forever." And that was the end of it. The empty parking spot was harder to manage. Derek from the facilities team stopped me in the hallway on a Wednesday. Big guy, good-natured, clipboard always in his hand. "Hey, Audra, you still using Bay 14? "Yes," I said, faster than I meant to. He looked at his clipboard. It's been showing empty on the log for a while. We got people asking about overflow." "It's in service," I said. "Should be back soon." He made a note. "Okay, just let me know." I went back to my desk and stared at my monitor for a while without seeing anything on it. That evening, I asked Orson again. We were in the kitchen after dinner. He was loading the dishwasher the specific way he liked it loaded. Glasses on the left, bowls facing in. And I came and leaned against the counter and said, "Celia's had it for 2 weeks. When is it coming back?" He kept loading. "Her car's still at the shop." "Orson, it's company property. I'm covering for it at work. I told facilities it's in service. I can't keep—" "You're catastrophizing again." "I'm not catastrophizing. I'm telling you a fact. You always do this." He closed the dishwasher. "Every time I ask you to help with something involving my family, you find a reason to make it a crisis. My sister is going through a hard time, and you're worried about a parking spot. I'm worried about my job. Nobody cares about a parking spot, Audra. It's not about the spot. Then what is it about?" He said it flatly, not a question, a challenge. I opened my mouth and then closed it, because the answer was everything. It's about everything. But you can't say that. You can't stand in your own kitchen and say, "It's about the fact that you've been taking from me for 4 years and you don't even see it, and I don't know how to make you see it without you making me feel like I'm the one who's broken." "Never mind," I said. "I'll talk to Celia this week," he said, opening the refrigerator. "She'll get the car back. Relax." He didn't talk to Celia that week. The decision happened on a Sunday, not dramatically. I wasn't listening to an empowering playlist or staring at myself in the mirror. I was sitting at my kitchen table in a flannel shirt and reading glasses with my work laptop open, and I was trying to finish a network diagram for a client proposal, and I realized I couldn't think straight. Not because the work was hard. I've done harder, I just couldn't hold the thread. My brain kept slipping sideways to the truck and the credit card and the charity board and the dinner parties and the parking spot and Derek's clipboard and the look Orson had given me in the kitchen. You always do this. And somewhere in that loop, something shifted. I closed the network diagram. I opened a browser and typed in Pinnacle Systems Employee Handbook 2024, downloaded the PDF, went straight to the Vehicle Policy section, page 47. Company vehicles assigned to employees remain the property of Pinnacle Systems and may not be loaned, subleased, or otherwise made available to non-employees without written authorization from the employee's direct supervisor and the Fleet Management Department. Unauthorized vehicle transfers may result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. I read it twice, then 3 times. I went to the kitchen and got a spiral notebook, plain green, the cheap kind from the dollar section at Target, and I came back to the table and I started writing. Dates, everything I could remember in order. The morning Orson asked, what he said, word for word as best I could reconstruct it. Every subsequent conversation, every excuse he'd given me, every time I'd asked for the truck back and been told I was materialistic or catastrophizing or selfish. I wrote for about an hour. My handwriting got messy by the end because I was writing fast, and a couple times I had to stop and breathe through my nose because my chest was doing that tight thing it did. But I kept writing. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote, "You are not going crazy. This is real. Document everything." Then I closed the notebook, put it in the inner pocket of my work bag, and went back to the network diagram. I finished it by 9:30, sent it to the client, got a good night's sleep for the first time in 2 weeks. Monday morning, before Darnell picked me up, I sent a quick email to Dwight Faber in Pinnacle's internal compliance office. I kept it vague on purpose. I said I had a general question about the vehicle policy and liability and asked if I could speak with him at his convenience. He responded by 2 p.m. Sure. Stop by whenever. Dwight is a meticulous little man who keeps his desk organized by color-coded folders. He's not unfriendly, just precise. I sat down across from him and explained the situation without naming names. A company vehicle that had been informally loaned to a family member without authorization, and I was curious about the official process for reporting it. He listened, nodded several times. Then he folded his hands on his desk. "Technically," he said, "vehicle misuse falls under asset management, but the formal complaint process for that runs through HR business partners." I looked at him. "HR business partners," I repeated. "Yes, that's the correct channel for an internal policy violation of this type." I sat with that for a second. HR business partners at Pinnacle Systems, which was Orson's department, which Orson had worked in for 6 years, where Orson had friends, allies, people who owed him favors. "Is there another channel?" I asked. Dwight thought about it. "You could escalate directly to your department VP if you feel there's a conflict of interest. But the initial report still technically originates through HR. I thanked him and walked out. I sat in the stairwell for 4 minutes before going back to my desk. Just breathing, thinking. The system that was supposed to protect me was routed directly through the person who was harming me. That's funny. That's actually funny in the way that makes your eyes sting. I opened my notebook on the stairwell step and wrote, "Compliance equals HR equals Orson. Escalate to Evelyn directly, but need documentation first." Then I went back to work. Here's the thing about when you're already anxious and someone hands you what looks like a lifeline. You grab it before you check if it's tied to anything. Brent Holloway works in my department. Good engineer. Talks a lot. Means well, mostly. He caught me in the break room on a Wednesday. The kind of Wednesday where I'd already spilled coffee on my keyboard and discovered a 3-hour backlog in my ticket queue. And he had that look on his face. The look of a man with information. He pulled me a little to the side, by the window. "Hey, I don't want to get in your business," he started, which is always how someone starts when they absolutely want to get in your business. "But I heard something that might be relevant to you." I leaned against the counter. "Okay. I was in the break room on the second floor yesterday, and I heard Orson talking to someone. I didn't see who, the door was half closed, and he mentioned something about a vehicle sharing agreement. Said the employee had signed off on it." My whole body went tight. "A vehicle sharing agreement," I said. "Yeah, like a formal document." "Did he say my name?" "He said she. I assumed." "Did he say my name?" Brent hesitated. "No." "But the timing, and you mentioned the truck." "Okay," I said. "Okay, thank you, Brent." I spent the next 2 days in a quiet panic. I checked every email in my inbox going back 8 months. I called the fleet vendor, a woman named Gail who was patient with me, and asked if any vehicle-sharing documentation had been filed on the F-150. She put me on hold for 11 minutes and came back and said she had nothing in the system. I went through the shared drive folders for my department. I looked in the HR portal under my employee profile. I even went back through the paper mail I'd received at home over the last 3 months, just in case something had come through that way. Nothing. There was no vehicle sharing agreement. There was no document. On Thursday afternoon, I called Brent and asked him to walk me through exactly what he'd heard, word for word. He tried, and the more he talked, the clearer it became. He'd caught about 45 seconds of a conversation through a half-open door. The she Orson had mentioned could have been anyone. The vehicle sharing agreement might have been about a different employee entirely. Brent's brain had connected the dots in the way that brains do when they're already primed by a story. I sat at my desk after that call and pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. 1 week. 1 week of chasing a document that didn't exist, going through channels I'd already been through, and I was right back where I started. Worse, actually, because now I'd burned time and energy and the truck was still gone and Orson still didn't know I was building anything, and I had nothing to show Evelyn except a green spiral notebook full of my own handwriting. I breathed. I thought about what I actually had versus what I'd been hoping to find, and then I started over. Real evidence doesn't usually look like a smoking gun. It looks like 3 boring things that add up to one clear picture. I started with what I knew for certain. The truck had left our driveway. I remembered the morning Orson first asked, the specific morning, the steel-cut oats, the phone scrolling, and I'd said Celia could use it for a couple days. A couple days. That was the agreement, if you could even call it that. Then I thought about my phone. I went through my voicemails the same way I'd go through a backup log looking for a corrupted file, methodically, starting from the oldest. And there it was, 3 weeks and 2 days ago. Orson, leaving me a voicemail at 8:14 in the morning when I was already at the office and he was still at home. "Hey, it's me. Celia's getting ready to head out. I told her you're okay with it. I said I'd take care of the paperwork on the fleet side. Just don't stress, okay? I've got it." "I'll take care of the paperwork on the fleet side." He'd never touched the paperwork. He just said he would, so I wouldn't. And now it had been weeks with nothing filed and the truck sitting in Celia's hands and my name on the registration. I played it 3 times. I sat very still. The second thing came from Hector. Hector Dominguez runs the parking garage at Pinnacle Systems. He's been there longer than most of the current leadership team, and he manages the vehicle log with the kind of dedication that a lot of people direct toward more glamorous pursuits. I'd talked to him maybe a dozen times in passing. He knew who I was. I went down to the garage on a Thursday on my lunch break, and I found him at his station, a small booth by the entrance with a space heater running and a clipboard hanging on a hook. "Hector," I said, "can I ask you something?" He looked up. "Sure." "The F-150 assigned to me, Bay 14. Have you been logging its movements?" He reached for the clipboard without hesitation, flipped back through pages. Each page was a month. He found the right section and ran his finger down the rows. "Checked out," he said. "Let me see. 17 days ago. Early. 6:58 in the morning." He looked up. "You weren't here yet. The keycard swipe was yours, but the cameras picked up someone else driving. Woman, dark hair, smaller than you. You have that on camera? We archive 30 days. After that, it cycles." I had maybe 13 days left on that window. "Hector," I said, "would you be willing to write down what you just told me? Just what you observed. Dates, times, what the camera showed." He looked at me for a moment. I could see him deciding. "Somebody giving you trouble?" he said. "I just need the facts documented." He nodded, slow, and picked up a pen. I found the email in Orson's home office on a Friday night. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the folder with our homeowner's insurance documents because I needed our policy number for something, and Orson organized his files in a way that made no logical sense, labeled by color, not content. And I was going through the blue folder when the printed email slid out onto the desk. It was a message between Orson and a man named Phil at the Pinnacle Fleet Coordination Office, dated 10 days ago. Orson had written that the F-150 was being informally reassigned for a short-term family use period and asked Phil to hold off on logging any changes until the paperwork situation gets sorted. Phil had written back, "Okay, no problem, let me know." I stared at it. This was it. This was the thing I'd been looking for. Orson coordinating directly with Fleet to keep the unauthorized loan off the books. Phil agreeing to look the other way. My hands were steady when I held my phone up and photographed it. I checked the image. Clear, readable, both email addresses visible, the date visible. I put the paper back in the blue folder, put the blue folder back in the cabinet, and went back to the living room. I felt calm. The kind of calm that comes after a long time of not being calm. I slept well that night, better than I had in weeks. I woke up at 6 in the morning and reached for my phone on the nightstand. Orson's side of the bed was empty. He was an early riser on weekends, always had been. I unlocked the phone and opened the photo folder. The photo was gone. I scrolled. I checked the recently deleted folder. Empty. I sat up slowly, checked again, still gone. I put the phone down on the comforter and looked at the wall for a minute. He'd gone through my phone while I slept, found the photo, deleted it, and then gone downstairs to make coffee like nothing had happened. I could hear the espresso machine running from the kitchen. I thought about going down there, confronting him. Watching him perform confusion and innocence and hurt feelings. I thought about what that conversation would accomplish. I thought about the blue folder in the cabinet. The printed email was still there. He hadn't taken that, but I couldn't photograph it again. He'd be watching now. I needed another way. I got up, got dressed, and went downstairs, and I said good morning, and I poured myself a cup of instant coffee from the packets I kept in the back of the pantry behind the quinoa. And I looked out the kitchen window at the empty driveway, and I thought very carefully about what I still had and what I could still do. I had 2 things Orson didn't know about. He knew about the photo because he deleted it. He didn't know about the voicemail because I hadn't told him, and he hadn't thought to check. He assumed I didn't document things, because for 4 years, I hadn't. He didn't know about Hector because there was no way he'd have thought to look there. Saturday morning, I went to Pinnacle Systems. Not unusual. I worked weekends sometimes when a client project needed it. I badged in, rode up to the 4th floor, sat at my desk, and opened my email. Then I went back down to the garage. Hector was there. He handed me a folded sheet of paper. His handwritten statement dated with the vehicle number, the date and time, and what the camera had shown. Neat block letters, factual, clean. "I also pulled the still," he said, and handed me a second sheet. A printed screenshot from the camera footage. Grainy, but clear enough. The F-150 pulling out. A woman in the driver's seat who was not me. "Thank you, Hector," I said. "Those cameras cycle in 13 days, he said, "just so you know." I had 12 days left. I went back upstairs. I took out my old iPad and an original Air, slow as Christmas but functional, and I set it on my desk and I opened the voice memo app. Then I held up my phone and played Orson's voicemail out loud, clearly, and let the iPad record it. I played it twice. I saved the recording under a file name that looked like a client project code. Then I transferred the folder to my iCloud backup. Then I sat there for a minute. I had one handwritten garage log entry with a timestamp, one printed camera still showing a non-employee driving my assigned vehicle, one voice recording of Orson saying he would handle paperwork he never handled, and my green notebook with 3 weeks of documented conversations. Not nothing, not the email. That was gone, but not nothing. I straightened the papers on my desk. I put them in a new folder, plain manila, nothing written on the outside. I put the folder in my work bag. Then I got back to the client project I was supposed to be finishing. I'd seen Patrice Nguyen around the office for years without knowing much about her. She was Evelyn's admin assistant. Efficient, quiet, always seemed to know exactly what was happening without being in the middle of it. We'd exchanged maybe 30 words total in 2 years. So I was surprised on a Monday when she sat down across from me in the cafeteria. I was eating a turkey sandwich and reading something on my phone, and suddenly there was a tray being set down, and Patrice was pulling out the chair like she'd been invited. "Can I sit?" she said, already sitting. "Sure," I said. She had a salad and a coffee. She arranged them neatly, picked up her fork, and then looked at me directly. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear me out before you react," she said. I put my phone down. "Okay. I know about the truck," she said. "I know you've been trying to document what Orson did, and I know you're stuck because anything that goes through HR goes through him." I kept my face very still. "How do you know that?" "Because I spent 8 months as his EA before I transferred to Evelyn's team," she said. "And in those 8 months, I watched him do versions of this twice. Different situations. One was travel reimbursement he redirected, one was a parking allocation, but the same pattern. Someone raised a concern, it went to HR, and Orson managed the process just enough to make the complaint go nowhere." "You transferred because of that?" "I transferred because I couldn't keep filing things I knew would get buried." She set down her fork. "I kept copies." I looked at her. "Copies of what?" She reached into the bag beside her chair and took out a USB drive, small, plain, black, set it on the table between us. 2 internal complaints filed against Orson over the past 3 years. Both went through the standard HR channel. Both were closed without formal findings. But I was the one who processed the paperwork, and I kept the originals before they were archived. She paused. "My name is on those files as the processing admin. If this ever went somewhere official, I'd have to acknowledge them." "Why are you doing this?" I said. Not suspicious, genuine. I wanted to understand. She picked up her coffee cup, wrapped both hands around it like she needed the warmth. "Because the second complaint," she said, "was filed by a woman who went back to her home country 6 months later. She wasn't forced out, not directly, but she left, and I've always believed it was because nobody protected her when it mattered." Patrice looked at her salad. "I am not going to watch that happen again." I looked at the USB drive sitting on the table between our lunch trays in a corporate cafeteria, with mild jazz playing through the ceiling speakers, and someone across the room laughing at something on their phone. "Patrice," I said. "Thank you." She nodded once. "Use it well," she said, and went back to her salad. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with everything spread in front of me. The green notebook, Hector's handwritten statement, the camera still, the iPad with the voice recording, Patrice's USB drive. I'd looked at the files in the Pinnacle parking lot before driving home, sitting in Darnell's passenger seat with my laptop on my knees, while he pretended to be very interested in a podcast. The files were real, detailed. 2 prior complaints, both naming Orson, both closed without documented resolution. I pulled up a blank document on my laptop and started writing a timeline. Plain language, no drama, just facts. October 14th. Orson requests informal use of company vehicle. October 14th. Verbal agreement for 2 days, not documented. October 16th. Vehicle not returned, Orson states. Celia needs more time. October 17th through 21st, multiple requests for return, all deflected with personal criticism of narrator. October 22nd, voicemail from Orson stating he would handle fleet paperwork, never did. October 28th, parking garage log and camera footage confirm non-employee operating vehicle. I wrote for about 45 minutes, read it back, edited for clarity. Added a section at the end labeled supporting materials with a numbered list of everything I had and where it was. Then I printed 2 copies. One I put in the manila folder, which went into my work bag. The other I folded, put in an envelope, addressed it to my sister Renata in Tucson, and wrote on the outside, "Don't open unless I call you and ask." She was used to me being strange about things. She'd hold on to it. I dropped it in the mailbox on the corner at 9:15 that night. On my way back inside, I stood on the front step for a moment and looked at the empty driveway. The streetlight was doing something orange and diffuse through the light November haze. One more week, I thought. One more week, and this is done. I sent the email to Evelyn on a Tuesday morning. Short, specific. Nothing that would tip Orson off if he happened to see it. Hi, Evelyn. I'd like to request a few minutes to discuss a company vehicle concern. No urgency, just want to make sure I'm following the right process. Let me know when you have availability. She responded in 19 minutes. Tuesday next week, 9 a.m., my conference room. Does that work? I wrote back, perfect, thank you. I went about my day, closed 3 tickets, had a call with the infrastructure team in Denver, ate lunch at my desk, drove home with Darnell and talked about whether the Cardinals had any shot at the playoffs, which they did not. I didn't tell Orson about the meeting. What I didn't know, not until Friday when a calendar notification landed in my phone, was that Orson had somehow gotten himself added to the invite. He must have seen the calendar entry in the shared system and inserted himself, which was something an HR business partner could technically do for a meeting flagged under a vague category like facility concerns. I stared at the notification for a long time. Then I thought, of course he did. He wants to manage this. He thinks he can sit in that room and frame the conversation before it starts. He thinks I'm going to walk in there without documentation, without evidence, without anything except my word against his, and that Evelyn is going to hear his explanation and decide it's a small misunderstanding. He has no idea what I'm walking in with. That night at dinner, Orson was easy, relaxed. He talked about a road bike he was thinking about buying and asked if I'd seen the documentary about Formula One that everyone was talking about. He poured wine. He laughed at something on his phone and showed me the meme, and I smiled at it. He was comfortable, confident. A man who had already decided how Tuesday was going to go. I slept fine. My alarm went off at 6. I lay in bed for exactly 1 minute, looking at the ceiling. Then I got up. I showered. I picked out the navy blazer. Not because it's lucky or because I was trying to make a statement, just because it's professional and it fits right and I feel like myself in it. I made instant coffee. I stood at the kitchen window with the mug in both hands and watched the sky go from dark to gray to the very early edge of pink. Orson was still sleeping. I picked up my work bag. I checked the contents one more time, the manila folder, the iPad fully charged, my green notebook. I zipped it closed. I opened the Lyft app, ordered a car. 5 minutes out. I did not start the car. I did not ask Orson for a ride. I did not mention the meeting. I stood in the kitchen and I drank the last of my coffee, and I thought about every morning I had stood at this window feeling like I was disappearing. Every morning the driveway was empty. Every morning the espresso machine ran and my instant coffee crystals dissolved in microwave water, and I told myself it was fine. It was temporary. It would get better. I was being too sensitive. The lift arrived. A silver Camry. The driver had the heat on and an oldies station playing low. Something from the late 70s. Something with a clean guitar line. "Pinnacle Systems?" he said. "That's right," I said. I got in. I put my bag on my lap. I watched my neighborhood go by. The houses I'd walked past 1,000 times, the coffee shop I never went to because Orson said the beans were bad, the turn onto the main road. At a red light, I checked my phone one more time. Everything was where it should be. The light changed. We drove. Evelyn was already seated when I came in, reading glasses on, legal pad ready, tea steaming on the table in front of her. I pulled out a chair, set my bag down, and started arranging things on the table. The manila folder, the iPad. I left the green notebook in the bag. I knew what was in it, and I didn't need to read from it. Orson came in about 90 seconds later. Gray blazer, coffee, unhurried. He sat across from me, leaned back, crossed one leg over the other. He glanced at the folder and the iPad on the table, and something moved behind his eyes. But he recovered quickly. Evelyn looked at both of us. Then she said, "Audra, I noticed you came in by rideshare today." I opened my mouth. "Yeah," Orson said smoothly. "Celia's been using the truck. My sister needed it, so Audra let her borrow it for a bit." Evelyn's face did not change, but she went very still. "I see," she said. "And how long has that been?" "A few weeks," Orson said. "Temporarily." "Her car's in the shop." "Orson," Evelyn said, "the vehicle assigned to Audra is company property. Are you aware of the policy on non-employee use?" "It's been informal," Orson said. "We were working on getting the paperwork sorted." I put my hand on the manila folder and opened it. "Evelyn," I said, "I have a timeline document here. It covers the period from October 14th to today. I also have a written statement from Hector Dominguez in the parking garage, with a camera still showing a non-employee operating the vehicle. And I have an audio recording I'd like to play." I picked up the iPad. I found the voice memo and pressed play. Orson's voice came through the speaker. "Hey, it's me. Celia's getting ready to head out. I told her you're okay with it. I said I'd take care of the paperwork on the fleet side. Just don't stress, okay? I've got it." The room was very quiet when the recording ended. Evelyn looked at Orson. Orson's expression had changed. The ease was gone. He was recalibrating. "That was a casual message," he said. "Out of context." "Orson." Evelyn's voice was quiet. Just the one word. He stopped. She looked at the folder, then at me. "What else do you have?" I slid the USB drive across the table. "These are copies of 2 prior internal complaints filed against Orson through the HR channel," I said. "Both were closed without documented resolution." Evelyn picked up the drive. She looked at it. She set it down. "Where did these come from?" "A former member of Orson's staff," I said. "Someone who processed the original paperwork and retained copies." Orson leaned forward. "Audra, this is—" "I'm going to ask you to stop speaking for a moment," Evelyn said. Not harsh, just clear. "Audra, I appreciate you bringing this forward. I'm going to call legal and compliance into this conversation." She picked up her desk phone, an actual desk phone, the kind that still has buttons, and pressed an extension. She spoke briefly to someone. She put the phone down. "Orson," she said, "effective immediately. You are on administrative leave pending review of these materials. You'll need to surrender your key card to security on your way out." Orson stared at her. He opened his mouth. "If you'd like to retain HR representation," Evelyn said, "you're entitled to that. The details will be in your email by end of day." He looked at me. for a long moment. I looked back. I did not look away. He stood up, picked up his coffee, and left the room. He left the gray blazer on the chair. Evelyn took off her glasses and set them on the legal pad. "Audra," she said, "I'm sorry it took this long for this to come to light." "I'm sorry I waited as long as I did," I said. She shook her head. "You didn't wait too long. You were careful." "There's a difference." From the employee handbook, Sonia said, "an informal arrangement isn't a recognized category for company vehicle use. Do you have written authorization from Ms. Callahan's supervisor?" "I'm in HR. I'm aware of the policies." "That's not what I asked." He shifted. "I was planning to file the proper documentation once." "Once what?" Sonia said. He didn't answer. "The voicemail," Evelyn said, "indicates you told Miss Callahan you would handle the fleet paperwork. Miss Callahan, is that when you stopped pursuing it?" "Yes," I said. "He said he'd take care of it." I trusted that. "It was temporary," Orson said. His voice had gone a little flat. "It was a temporary family situation. I don't understand why this requires—" "Because it's been going on for over 3 weeks," Evelyn said, "and you used your position in HR to route any potential complaint through your own department." She looked at the USB drive sitting on the table. "And these prior complaints suggest this is not an isolated incident." Orson looked at the drive. Something crossed his face that I can only describe as the look of a man watching a card he thought he'd buried surface in front of him. "Those complaints were reviewed and closed," he said. "They were closed through your department," Sonia said. "That's a distinction that matters." Dwight Faber said something quiet to Sonia about review timelines. She nodded. She made a note. Evelyn looked at Orson. "I'll need your keycard," she said. He reached into his jacket pocket, set it on the table. It made a small, flat sound against the wood. "My computer," he started. "IT will be in touch," she said. He stood. He looked at me one more time. I still didn't look away. He walked out. Evelyn turned to me. "The truck will be returned to your possession today. Compliance will reach out to you this afternoon about next steps in the review." "Thank you," I said. "Go get some work done," she said, and she almost smiled. The truck was back in Bay 14 by 4 that afternoon. I went down to the garage after my last call of the day and stood there for a minute just looking at it. It smelled like someone else's air freshener. Vanilla. Slightly too sweet. I rolled the window down on the drive home. Cold air. Desert cold. The dry kind that doesn't apologize. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the heat on low and the radio on something I picked. The next few weeks were strange. Orson moved out, or rather, he arranged to have a friend come get his things on a Wednesday when I was at work. He left the espresso machine. I don't know if that was symbolic or if he just didn't want to carry it. I moved it to the garage. I bought myself a coffee maker at Target, a simple one, $42, makes 8 cups, nothing fancy. I like it fine. I filed the divorce paperwork in December. My sister Renata drove up from Tucson to sit with me at the attorney's office, still holding the envelope I'd mailed her. Unopened because I'd never called and asked her to open it. She handed it back to me in the parking lot and said, "You want to burn it or keep it?" I laughed for the first time in what felt like a long time. We burned it in her car's ashtray in the parking lot. Took 3 tries with a lighter from her purse. At work, people mostly gave me space. Nobody said anything directly. A few people were noticeably cooler to me. People who'd been friendly with Orson. People who didn't know what to believe or had decided his version of events made more sense. I let them have that. I couldn't control it, and I didn't try. Evelyn, for her part, was steady. She gave me a complex infrastructure project, a real one, with teeth, the kind I'd been asking to lead for 2 years, and she emailed me at the end of the first week of December to say she'd be recommending me for a director-level review in Q1. That email sat in my inbox for a while before I answered it. I read it several times. The part where she said she'd been watching my work for 2 years and believed I'd been overlooked due to internal dynamics. Internal dynamics. That's how HR people say it when they mean your husband's presence in the building made you smaller and nobody noticed until you made them notice. I moved into an apartment in January, second floor, south-facing, a small balcony where I put a couple of chairs and a plant I was determined not to kill. I bought a couch the color of deep teal. I'd always wanted one like it, and Orson had said it was too much. I put art on the walls that I chose. I cooked dinner at whatever time I wanted. I slept on the whole bed. Patrice and I started having lunch on Thursdays. She brought really good leftovers and strong opinions about cloud infrastructure vendors, and I liked her immediately in the way you like people who don't waste words. I started sleeping through the night again in February. That sounds small. It was not small. I ran into Orson in a Trader Joe's parking lot on a Saturday afternoon in late March, about 3 months after everything. I almost walked past him. He looked different. Smaller, somehow, though he hadn't lost weight. More like something he'd always worn had been taken off him, and he hadn't figured out how to stand without it. His hair had more gray in it. He was carrying a reusable shopping bag with a daffodil on it. "Audra," he said. I stopped. "Orson." We stood there in the parking lot with carts rolling past and someone's kid yelling about something and the afternoon light doing that Phoenix thing where everything goes a little gold. "I heard about the promotion," he said finally. "Director of Infrastructure. That's really good." "Thank you. I'm doing some consulting work now." He shifted the bag to his other hand. "Smaller company. Different pace." He paused. "I've been in therapy." I nodded. "My therapist says He stopped, looked at the ground. "She says I have difficulty recognizing when I'm using control as a way to manage anxiety, that I put people in situations and then reframe their reaction as the problem." He said it the way people say things they've rehearsed, carefully, a little stiff. "She says I wasn't a good partner." "Okay," I said. I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm just saying. I know I wasn't good to you. I know it took more than it should have." I thought about the empty driveway, the instant coffee behind the quinoa, the credit card bills, the dinner parties where he explained my own job back to me. The photo deleted from my phone in the dark at 5 a.m. "I hope therapy helps you," I said, and I meant it, not warmly exactly, but genuinely. He was going to keep living after this, and I didn't want him to be the same man he'd been. Not for my sake, for whoever came next. He nodded. "Are you happy?" I thought about my apartment, the teal couch, the art on the walls, Patrice's leftovers and the director-level project and sleeping through the night. And then I thought about Jerome. I'd met Jerome Whitfield at a cybersecurity conference in February. He'd been presenting on endpoint vulnerability frameworks, and I'd asked a question during Q&A that turned into a 20-minute conversation in the hallway afterward. Tall, unhurried, gray at his temples. He listened the way people listen when they're actually listening, not waiting for you to finish so they can talk. He'd asked about my work and genuinely wanted to know the answer. We'd had coffee, then dinner. Then a weekend hike through South Mountain where he asked follow-up questions about a networking problem I'd mentioned, and I'd realized halfway through my answer that I'd been holding back for so long that talking freely about my own work felt strange and new and good. He never made me feel like too much. He never explained my job back to me. When I worked late, he texted to ask if I wanted him to grab food. When I needed to cancel plans for a deadline, he said, "Of course, let me know how the rollout goes." "Yes," I told Orson. "I really am." He looked at me. Something moved in his face, not anger, not resentment, something sadder than that. "That's good," he said. "You deserve that." We said goodbye. I watched him walk toward the store entrance, that daffodil bag swinging at his side. I drove home through the late afternoon. The truck, my truck, Bay 14, Pinnacle Systems logo on the door, handled smooth and solid the way it always had. The windows were down. The radio was on something I'd chosen, South Mountain went pink and then gold in the rearview mirror the way it always does when the light's right. Jerome was at my apartment when I got back. He'd let himself in with the key I'd given him 6 weeks ago. He had takeout spread on the kitchen table. Thai, from the place on Camelback I'd mentioned once and he'd remembered, and his laptop open to something he was working on, but he closed it when he heard me come in. "How was your day?" he said. "Strange," I said. "I ran into Orson." He looked at me. Not alarmed, not performatively concerned, just paying attention. "I'm okay," I said. "He's in therapy." He acknowledged some things. It was almost sad. I dropped my bag on the couch. Also, he had a grocery bag with a daffodil on it. Jerome smiled at that. A real smile, slow. "Progress," he said. "Maybe." I sat down at the table and looked at the Thai food. I told him I was happy. "Were you?" "Yes," I said. I was telling the truth. He passed me the pad Thai and we ate with the balcony door cracked and the desert air coming through, and afterward we sat on the teal couch and he asked about the infrastructure project and I told him the whole thing, the complicated part, the technical part. And he listened all the way through and asked a question at the end that was actually good. I thought about what Evelyn had said to me months later when I'd asked her if she regretted how it all unfolded. She'd said, "I regret that it needed to unfold at all. But watching you bring that documentation into that room, watching you do that quietly, carefully, without any drama, that reminded me why we have policies in the first place. Not to protect the institution, to protect the people who keep it running." My truck still sits in Bay 14 every morning. The sign on the reserved spot says, "Director of Infrastructure Now." New title, new badge, same parking spot. They repainted the sign in January and I stood there looking at it for a minute before I went inside. It was never about the truck. I know that. It was about the morning I finally opened the employee handbook instead of the cabinet where we kept the aspirin. It was about a green spiral notebook from the dollar section at Target and a voicemail I almost deleted and a man named Hector who kept careful records on a clipboard in a parking garage. It was about a woman named Patrice who kept a USB drive because she believed someone would eventually need it. It was about learning that silence is not the same as peace, that keeping the water calm doesn't mean there's no storm, that you can give so much of yourself away in small, reasonable-sounding increments that one day you're standing in your kitchen at 6 in the morning, making instant coffee and trying to remember what it felt like to take up space. I remember now. I lost a marriage. I lost a house I'd helped pay for. I lost some people who decided his version of events was easier to believe, but I kept myself. All of it. The sharp parts and the tired parts and the part that knew, the whole time that something was wrong, and I kept the truck. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.